Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining today's webinar, Purchasing and AP Automation the PN3 Way. Let's get started. A little bit about SIS. We were founded in 1996 and we're headquartered in Duluth, Georgia, just outside of Atlanta. SIS delivers business solutions that help project and service-driven companies unify business processes and applications across the enterprise, thus delivering better visibility and efficiency. Services that SIS offers are current state assessment, business process analysis, requirements and fit gap analysis, software design, development, and deployment, custom application development, ERP and CRM implementation, rapid deployments for hub and spoke rollouts, and on-premise or cloud deployments. Before we get started, we want to just go over a little bit of housekeeping. If you need any assistance during the webinar, please email me at info@sisn.com. We're going to have a Q&A session at the end, but if you think of any questions ahead of time, go ahead and put those in the questions box and we'll do our best to get them answered. For optimal viewing, please view in full screen mode. We're going to be recording this webinar and sending you a follow-up email with the recording and the slide deck. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Derek Hicks, Managing Principal at PN3.
Thank you, Eric. Appreciate that. Let me share my screen. Everyone should be able to see a slide deck that I have up now.
Yep, looks.
Thanks, Eric. One thing I do want to reiterate before I jump in, I have a really brief slide deck, and then I'm going to dive into the PN3 demonstration. And Eric mentioned that, please feel free to post questions as I'm presenting. We will have a Q&A at the end, but if you have a question and if you're concerned you might forget it or you can't stay on for the entire session, please feel free to post it, and we'll try to answer as many questions as we can as we're going through today's presentation. So without further delay, let's go ahead and jump in. First, I'd like to speak to, what's the value proposition of PN3? What value do our tools bring to our customers? And they really tend to fall into three buckets. The first being improving the efficiency of your purchasing and/or AP process. And by that, I'm not solely referring to the benefits to the accounting and finance teams, but really every department within your organization, because AP tends to touch, and purchasing tends to touch all departments. And the reason why I'm kind of separating the two is because I would guess that half of our clients are only using PN3 as an AP automation tool, and the other half are using it for both purchasing and AP automation. But in both cases, it tends to touch virtually every department. The second key is we want to make sure that our policies and procedures are being adhered to at all times. In a paper environment, it's not as easy to guarantee that. But in a digital environment, configuring PN3 to adhere to your policies and procedures guarantees that your internal controls are being adhered to at all times. So this a lot of times is led by the management team or your auditing team or your ERP partner that says, hey, we want to make sure that we're giving you tools that enable you to do that. And then next, with everything becoming digital, you have visibility, visibility into the process and can therefore more effectively manage your purchasing and AP procedures. Let's talk about transaction types. Again, about 50% of our clients are using PN3 for requisitioning, and PO creation. So their staff go into PN3, create requisitions. The requisitions are sent for approval, and once fully approved, purchase orders are created. All of our clients use PN3 for AP automation. Vendor invoices is the primary transaction type. We can process both PO and non-PO invoices. And oh, by the way, if you tell PN3, we don't really need your purchasing, your requisitioning system. We already have our POs in SL. We like how they're getting there, but we do want to be able to invoice against those POs. We can do that simply by deploying our AP tool. So we can handle both PO and non-PO invoices. The next transaction type are expense reimbursements. Staff can submit expense reimbursements, as you see from this photo here. It can be a mobile phone, or, as you'll see in today's demonstration, a browser. Reconciling credit card spend. Many of our clients have staff that have organizational credit cards, and they're challenged with reconciling those. There's a form in PN3 that streamlines that process. Payment requests. In PN3, really think of payment requests as a tool to be used only in cases when you need to pay a vendor and you do not have an invoice. I'm in a department, I need to get a payment to a vendor, I don't have an invoice, I can use the payment request form in PN3, attach my backup and other supporting documents, and submit that request for approval, again, only to be used when you don't have an invoice. And then lastly, there's also functionality for contract requests. We are adding in our January release of PN3 an option for payment processing. We've had a lot of clients in 2020 that have said, we'd like to outsource our payment processing so that we don't have to come into the office to do anything. And so in our January release, our partnership with CPay Plus will give PN3 users, in addition to approving invoices or expense reports and payment requests, the appropriate staff can approve the release of payments as well, and payments can go out via ACH, check, or virtual card. We have seamless integration with Dynamics SL. And by that, I mean you don't have to key anything from PN3 into SL. You never have to import data into SL via spreadsheet or text file or an XML file. The PN3 database is communicating directly with your SL database or databases if you have multiple entities. And so we're pulling in vendor data, coding data, payment, and then we're also passing data to SL. AP vouchers in all cases, but sometimes purchase orders as well. We're going to transition into the demonstration next. But please, if anyone has any questions, although we'll do a Q&A at the end, please feel free to post questions as I'm conducting this afternoon's demonstration. We find the best way to give you a feel for how PN3 works is to simulate processing transactions. I'm going to log in and out as different users just to kind of simulate workflows. I'm going to kick off the process logging in as Pamela Hood, an AP user. And by the way, you've probably noticed that PN3 is a web application, so there's no software that will load on a user's workstation. They're going to access PN3 from a browser. The software can be installed on premises or in our cloud. I want to kick off today's session reviewing the various ways that you can get invoices into PN3. So I'm going to go to our batch capture process. And under that, eCapture is how most of our clients tell us they're getting the largest percentage of their invoices. By eCapture, I'm referring to invoices that you're receiving via email. So we ask our clients, if they haven't already done so, we ask them to create a dedicated AP email account. And then reach out to your vendors and suggest that instead of sending invoices in traditional mail, the vendors send the invoices to that email account as PDF files. We configure PN3 to monitor the email account that you've created. In many cases, it's invoices at your domain or payables or AP. Whatever you'd like to call it is fine. We'll configure PN3 to monitor that email account. And anytime we see a message come in that has a single PDF file attached or multiple PDF files, we grab each invoice and we pull it in. So this table that we're looking at now are invoices that have come in via email. So I'm just going to open up one of them. So on the right, you'll see an image of the invoice. And on the left, excuse me, you'll see your header data. Now, the vast majority of invoices that are going to come in via email this way are what's called searchable PDF files, meaning the PN3 system can read the invoice and grab data off of it. So we give you the ability to set up a template for each vendor so that PN3 knows where to go for that vendor to grab invoice number, invoice date, and invoice amount, and it will populate those header fields. So this invoice has come in. I know who the vendor is, and I'd like to route this invoice to Mary Jones to get authorization to pay it. That's one of the workflows. You can build as many workflows as you need. There are a variety of different types of workflows as well. In this case, Pamela, the AP user, says, I'm routing this transaction to Mary. She has the option at this point of coding it or sending it uncoded and letting Mary code it, which is what I'm going to do in this case. So when I hit save and upload, off this invoice goes, and it presents the next invoice. So the invoices that have come in via email are simply queued up so that you can take action on each invoice. In addition to routing to a user, I could have said, I'm going to use maybe my department workflow or specify up front who I want it to go to. There are a lot of different workflows that you can configure here. You can also set up approval templates. So really a lot of ways to build workflows. But in this first example, I simply routed it to Mary, and I'm going to log in a few minutes as Mary and continue processing this transaction as a manager. Now, in addition to the invoices that are coming in via email, you also have the ability, because you're going to still have invoices coming in paper form, to scan a batch directly in. If you have a scanner connected, if not, you can go to a network scanner, scan there, and import invoices. I mentioned earlier reconciling credit card charges. We give you the ability to either manually import them, or we can automate the import for American Express and over 14,000 financial institutions. So as your staff are using their cards, it pulls in those charges so that they can code them and attach backup in a very efficient manner. And I'll cover that in a little more detail as part of today's demonstration. Lastly, you can also import invoices in from a spreadsheet. These batch capture processes are available to anyone that's an AP user. Now, if I'm not an AP user, or I am, and I have a single invoice, I can also submit that invoice. So I could tell PN3 that I have a new invoice. If I have a scanner connected, I can scan it. Otherwise, I can just say I want to import my file. And then I can use the drag and drop functionality in PN3 to pull the invoice in, or I could have hit select there and browse to the invoice. If I happen to have a scanner connected and I tell PN3 I have a new invoice and I have a small scanner connected to my laptop, so I'm going to put the invoice into the feeder of that scanner and scan this invoice in. So if I have a scanner connected, I can scan the individual invoice in. It might be 1 page or 10 pages. It'll scan in the entire invoice. Or if I'm an AP user, I can use the batch scan and scan a group of invoices at once. I'm going to come out now as the AP user. I'm going to log back in as Mary, the manager we sent that invoice to. So I'm going to sign out here, and I'm going to sign back in as Mary. By the way, when an invoice or any transaction goes to a staff person, they'll get an email alert, because we know they're not just sitting in PN3 all day. They'll get email alerts to let them know when transactions are awaiting their action. And you can also turn on reminders to remind them after 3 days, 5 days, 7 days, whatever period of time you'd like the reminders to start to go out if someone has a transaction that they haven't taken action on. Now, I meant to change my view to 90% here just to make it a little larger for you. I'm going to log in now as Mary. As soon as a staff person logs in, we present what we call their task list. Many clients call this their inbox. So Mary can see that there are 3 transactions awaiting her action. This last one, this is the one that we just routed to Mary a few minutes ago. So Mary can see the invoice, and she can determine which action to take. She has the ability to approve it or reject it, or she may look at this and she can see that Pamela sent it to her, and if she decides that, I shouldn't take action on this invoice, I don't really deal with this vendor, she can select route, tell PN3 that she'd like to route this transaction to Pamela, and put in a note to explain why she's doing that. Or if she knows which department the invoice belongs to, she could route it to a user in that department. I'm not going to reroute this one. I'm going to hold on to it because ultimately I'm going to approve it. I'm going to hit cancel here, and Mary says, I'm ready to approve this invoice. But before approving it, I'm going to code it. There are 3 ways that a user can code. They can import codes from a spreadsheet. So I can select add coding from spreadsheet, browse to the spreadsheet, and then import my codes, option 1. Option 2 says I'm going to key my codes in. Now, here you see a single field expense account. In all the years, I can think of less than 10 SL clients that have done it this way. The vast majority of our SL clients have a drop down for account, a separate drop down for sub account, and then if they're using project controller, they'll have a drop down for project and a drop down for task. You do have the ability to control the selections in each drop down that are available to an individual user. So if your sub account has a department or cost center in it, and you want to make sure that users can only code to the sub accounts that have their department or cost center in it, you can limit them to certain departments or cost centers. Or if you're coding to projects, you can limit them to only projects that they should be able to code to. So every user does not have to have access to every code that's active in SL. Every user also doesn't have to have access to every company. You can limit them to certain companies as well. But they will see in the drop-down what's available to them. And they can create a single line of distribution or multiple lines. And they can find the codes they're looking for by keying in the number, or I can key in the description and it will filter the drop-down by the description as well. The last way that staff can code invoices is to retrieve their own default. And let me explain what I mean by that. In your PN3 setup, you can either tell PN3 that I want to have one set of default codes for a given vendor ID, or I want to configure PN3 to let each user have their own default codes, which means there's a combination of vendor ID/user ID that determines what the default codes are. If you have a vendor that multiple users deal with and they're in different departments, they can have their own default coding. And so I could tell PN3, I want to retrieve my default. In this case, I have default codes with multiple lines of distribution. And again, for our SL clients, instead of this single expense account, there's a column for account, a column for sub-account, and if you're using Project Controller, a column for project and task as well. But once I pull in the default codes, I can edit them if necessary. I can still add additional lines, but instead of starting with no coding, if I know I code this vendor's invoice very similar way each time, I can retrieve my default and make the necessary changes. After doing that, I can drill down to see impact on budget. For each of my distribution lines, I'll see the annual budget, what's committed, my current balance, what's in the workflow pending approval, and what my balance would be if everything pending is approved. So I can see real time the impact on my budget. Mary says, perfect, I'm ready to approve this. However, in this example, Mary's approval limit is $1,000. This is a $10,000 invoice. That does not mean we're not going to let Mary approve it. We certainly are, but it does mean when she approves it, we're not going to send it to AP. It exceeds her approval limit, so when she approves it, we're automatically routing it to her manager, Susan. And we present to Mary the next transaction that's in her inbox. I mentioned earlier the credit card reconciliation form. So this shows the date of the charge, who the charge was with, and the amount. So if I'm reconciling this, I might say, I don't want Amazon to hit my general ledger. Let me put in a description in here. Sorry for my typo there. Again, I'll see account, sub-account, and maybe even project and task, depending upon your configuration. I can also hit add to attach supporting documents at the line level or at the form level. So if I have all of my receipts in one file, I can attach them at the form level, or I can attach them at the line level. But this gives you an efficient way to code, attach backup, and confirm that these charges are accurate. I'm going to come out now as Mary. I want to continue processing that invoice. So I'm going to sign in now as Mary's manager, Susan. Susan, by the way, would have received an email alert. Susan logs in, and her task list is presented. This second transaction, this is the transaction that Mary just approved. So Susan can see, because this is your audit trail. Susan can see that Mary has approved it, date and time, and that Mary was the one that coded it. As Mary's manager, if she wants to edit the coding, she can. Or if she has a question, she can use the notes functionality to start a dialogue with Mary. In this case, Susan says, by the way, she can also drill down to look at budgets. But in this example, she says, you know, this all looks good, but I'm managing a contract with this vendor. And I'm going to link the invoice to the contract so that I can do two things. She links the invoice to the open contract and selects Save. As soon as she does that, two things happen. PN3 will attach the contract. If she'd like to see it, she can simply select View, and it will open up and present the contract. But she also has the ability to select contract info to see the contract amount, what's been paid, the balance, and the expiration date. Now, I do want to mention here, just in case there are any SL clients in today's webinar that are using the SL subcontracts module, this is different from that. However, we can integrate with subcontracts as well. But this is different from the subcontracts. You can have contracts in PN3 even if you're not using the subcontracts add-on in SL. So I just want to make that distinction because we're really not talking about the same thing. Susan says, this is perfect. I'm ready to approve this. Susan's approval limit is $25,000. It exceeds the $10,000 invoice amount. So when she approves it, it's fully approved and it routes back to AP. So I'm going to quickly sign out as Susan, and I'm going to sign back in as Pamela. Pamela is the AP user, by the way. The invoice has returned, and it has a status of manager approved. That means that AP can send this invoice to SL. Very easy to do. All you have to do is either hit approve here in the header or down below close to the distribution lines. And as soon as the AP user selects approved, PN3 is going to look into SL to see if this AP user has a batch open for the period this invoice is going to. If they do, we immediately add it to that batch. If they don't, we're going to create a batch on their behalf and start appending to that new batch. Key point is that you don't have to open up SL and do any data entry to get the transaction in. Header data, distribution data is going to flow from PN3 into SL to create the voucher. You're still going to release your batches the same way you do. So you do your same batch edit, your batch reviews, but you don't have to key anything into your batches. PN3 is going to create those batches automatically. After the transactions have gone through the appropriate approval rules, AP reviews it and AP sends it over. One thing I forgot to show you, I'm glad I'm back over here now. I forgot to talk about when I was looking at eCapture, PO invoices. So I'm going to link an invoice to a purchase order. So I have my invoice and I have my PO data. So I can do 2- or 3-way match invoice to purchase order. I forgot to show you that earlier when I was here. All right, let's do this. I'm going to sign back in as Mary. We're going to talk about some of the other transaction types. Nope, didn't mean to log into this one. I meant to log into this one. All right. In addition to vendor invoices, there's a form we call the payment request form. As I mentioned earlier, this is intended to be used in cases when you don't have an invoice, but you want to get payment to a vendor. So as a user, I could tell PN3, I want to get a payment to First Street Graphics. This is a drop-down that you create. You decide which selections are available to staff. These are the more common use cases we see for this form. Customer refunds, cash advances, but the biggest one tends to be a vendor deposit. So as the user, Mary Jones says, I need to get a deposit payment to this vendor by the 18th of December. And then she'll select add row. She'll put in a description of what it's for, the amount of the deposit. Again, she can code it, account, sub-account, and or project and task. So I'll code it accordingly, save my line. I can hit add to attach backup. I can add additional lines. But I'm going to route this form for approval when I don't have an invoice. If I have an invoice, I don't need this form. Next transaction type, expense reimbursements. By the way, a lot of the functionality you've seen me go through today, I can do the same thing in an app on my mobile phone. What reminded me of that was expense reports, because that's where the mobile app was originated, but we've added to it over time. So I'm a user and I'm going to tell PN3, you know what, I'm going to do an expense report for the month of December, and I might have expenses all month. So I'm going to put in a date range from the 1st through the 31st, and I'll simply add expenses as I go. So if I had an expense on the 2nd, this is a drop down that you create. A lot of our SL clients will map this expense category to the appropriate account. I select the category. I put in a description, the amount. I'm just going to select any codes here, but again, account, sub-account, and or project and task. I save that line. If I have my receipt now, I can hit add, scan or import. Typically, I'm going to import. I can hit select to browse to the receipt, or if I've been routing my receipts to the e-receipts email account, all of my receipts are sitting here waiting for me, and I'm the only one that can see them. And I can link the appropriate receipt to the appropriate expense. So I don't have to browse and find it. It's going to be right here. Or if I'm on my mobile phone, I can simply take a picture of it. So I can enter in additional lines. I can also enter in mileage. So if I needed to use my vehicle and I need to be reimbursed, I select the date. When I select the date, PN3 pulls in the reimbursement rate. How we determine the mileage is one of two ways. If we have the MapQuest integration turned on, users will put in a starting address and an ending address. You can either key it in or select it from a drop-down, starting address, ending address. PN3 will calculate the miles times the rate to determine the amount. If the MapQuest integration is not on, this mileage field would permit users to key in the miles to multiply times the rate to determine the amount. So this expense report form can be used for out-of-pocket expenses and mileage reimbursement. There's also a contract request form. This form is intended to be used in cases where the client says, I'd like to have and build a workflow in PN3 for the approval of our contracts, both financial and legal workflows. So you can set up those workflows. Staff can generate contracts, attach the draft of the contract, route it for approval. Once fully approved, you can attach the executed contract and then invoice against that contract, as I did earlier today. And then you can also build workflows for new vendors. One distinction here on new vendors, though, is that if I'm using the new vendor workflow form, after the vendor is fully approved, because you can set up an approval for that, it does not automatically create the vendor in SL. You still have to go in and add the vendor into SL the same way you do today. All right, let's talk about reports. I'm going to sign out. And by the way, please, if you have questions, please post them. We'll do a Q&A at the end. But quite often, we'll receive questions during the demonstration, and so please feel free to do so. So far, we got a pretty quiet group, but please feel free to do so. Reports. The reports in PN3 are not intended to replace the financial reports in SL, but they are intended to help you manage the purchasing and AP processes. So a really popular report, you can see there's a long list, is what we call the Open Transactions Report. This report says, I'm going to show you everything that's in PN3 that has not been fully approved and sent to SL yet. It breaks up the transactions by age, 0 to 30, 31 to 60, 61 to 90, and greater than 91 days. For each transaction, I'll see vendor, invoice number, date, amount, and this last column shows me whose inbox the transaction is sitting in. This first column has a hyperlink. If I want to get to any transaction, I can also export this to Excel or print the report. I could have also opened up this report and said, I don't want to see it for everyone. I only want to see what's in this user's task list. And it limits the report to what's in that individual user's task list. But as you can see, there are accrual reports, a variety of different reports to help you manage your purchasing and AP processes. PN3 also eliminates the need to maintain any paper files, because staff can come to this page to search for transactions. And as you can see here, there are many fields. I could search by company if you have multiple entities, by vendor. I can search by the batch they're in, by contract number or PO number, invoice date range, invoice amount range. I can also search by action taken, who took the action and when they took that action. And then lastly, I can search by how they're coded. Everything charged to a particular department or a particular account or particular project in a given date range. Because many of the managers for a lot of our clients are not SL users, sometimes they're curious if something's been paid and they have to call finance to find out. Now, they can simply check in PN3. So if I said I'm looking for all of the transactions for this vendor, let's just say from October the 1st, let's go through today, through the 9th of December. Now, when I hit search, all of the transactions for this vendor may not come back if I'm limited to what I can see based on my security as a user. but everything that I can see comes back in this table. The status will show me what's going on with the transaction. AP approved confirms for me that it's in SL. Manager approved says it's still in PN3. AP hasn't approved it to send it to SL yet. But I can also see that all of these AP approved transactions have been paid because I have a payment number and a payment date. If I'm curious how they've been paid, I can open up the transaction and I can see here in the header, payment type, number, date, and amount. And I'm not sure if you noticed, different users can have different views of this page. AP typically wants to see all of the header data, remit to address, everything, due date, terms. Managers quite often say, no, I want to see this condensed view. This is a little bit too much. I don't really want to see all of this. And users can control under their preferences which view is their default, although as you can see here, I can toggle from one to the next. We also, and I'm not going to go into great detail on it, but I just want to mention, as I talked about earlier, there's also a tool in PN3 for requisitioning. So I can create new requisitions or requisitions from older POs, and you can build workflows in PN3 for the approval of requisitions. Let's get back to the slide deck. Today's demonstration was really intended just to give you a glimpse into, what are the possibilities? What are some of the things PN3 can do? We don't take a deep dive during the webinar. We just want to introduce you to the capabilities. We hope that you've seen enough to intrigue you to the point where you said, I'd like to learn a little bit more. We want to do one-on-one demonstrations where we can open up the phone lines, learn more about your SL setup and your requirements, and conduct a more detailed demonstration. If after that you feel there is a PN3 solution that will meet your needs, we can then present a proposal. Now would be a good time to do our Q&A. One question has been posted already, and the question is this available in all SL versions? And the answer is yes. We do need to know which version you have because the integration scripts vary based on the version of SL you're using, but we can integrate PN3 with any version of SL.
Looks like we have another question. Can our AP staff edit coding entered by departments?
Yes. AP, we always give the accounting and finance staff the ability to confirm that coding is right, and if it's not, make the correction before sending the transaction to SL. We find that in many cases, you don't always trust staff to code correctly, so you can make those changes if they're required.
Looks like we have another question. They want to know if they can attach supporting documents to transactions.
You certainly can, and let me get back into the application and I'll give you a feel for that. So there's an Add Document button here. Thanks, Eric. There's an Add Documents button here. Let me make sure everyone can see that. So if I'm attaching supporting documents, I can select Add, and I can scan or import to attach those documents.
What about when a manager is on vacation? Someone wants to know what y'all do in that situation.
All right, great question. Let's do this. I'm going to sign out here. Could do it here. I'm as an AP user, but I want to sign in as a manager just to give you more visibility into that. So if I'm going to be away, I can come under my preferences in PN3 and tell PN3 I'm going to be out of the office. I can select a start date and an end date, and then I can assign a delegate. What I'm doing when I do that is I'm giving my delegate the authority to act on my behalf during that time frame.
What about will AP get a notice if an individual has been rerouted to a different manager?
Well, what will happen, AP, when the transaction comes back, AP doesn't get a notice right away. But if they go and look in that open transactions report, they can see that it's in this new person's task list. But when a transaction comes back fully approved, in the milestones list, if I have been approving, let's say that Eric has assigned me as his delegate and I've approved on his behalf, in the milestones, it's going to show that, hey, this was intended to go to Eric, but Derek is Eric's delegate and he approved on Eric's behalf. So you can see in the milestones, your audit trail, who touched it and why they took action on it, and that I was acting as Eric's delegate.
Okay, great. Looks like that's all the questions that have come in. Let's move into the next part that you've all been waiting for, and we'll announce the Starbucks gift card winner.
Hey, Eric, it looks like one more question may have come in.
Oh, yeah, I see that one just came through.
Yep.
Can the system be used for credit card transaction reports by individuals? Can the credit card data be imported from the bank like a Concur system?
It depends on the bank. There are over 14,000 financial institutions that we can get automatic feeds from. So we'd like to learn a little bit more about, Visa, MasterCard, which bank it's with. We can certainly do that if it's an American Express card, but we offer that functionality, but it depends on the financial institution.
Okay, thanks for that. If you think of any other questions after we log off today, feel free to email myself or Derek and we'll get those answered for you. And now we're going to announce the winners of the Starbucks gift card. We're giving out 3 $10 gift cards for people that registered and were in attendance. And our winners are Patricia Mahoney, Lisa McCoy, and Patricia Barrow. Congratulations. We'll be sending you an email with the gift card information. And with that, I want to thank you for attending today. If you have any questions, please let us know. Got some contact information that we'll keep on the screen. And we also want to thank you for choosing SIS. We want to thank PN3 for helping us put on this presentation and wish you a happy holiday season. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. And thanks, Eric and Debbie, for hosting this webinar.
Thanks, Derek.
Bye-bye.